Okay. 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 Am I here? Am I here? Am I here? I'm pissed off. I'm, I'm, I am, I am pissed off. Are we back? Am I legible? Can you hear me? It says the stream's online. So, we're back? Okay, we're back. We're back. We're back. We're back. Okay, now we can start part 2. I'm just gonna start because I'm a little scared of the internet, so. I was questioned several times immediately after my arrest, but they were all formal examinations, as to my identity and so forth. As to the first of these, which took place at the police station, nobody seemed to have much interest in the case. However, when I was brought before the examining magistrate a week later, I noticed that he eyed me with distinct curiosity. Like the others, he began by asking my name, address, and occupation, the date and place of my birth. Then he inquired if I had chosen a lawyer to defend me. I answered, no, I hadn't thought about it, and asked him if it was really necessary for me to have one. Why do you ask that? He said. I replied that I regard my case as very simple. He smiled. Well, it may seem so to you, but we've got to abide by law, and if you don't engage a lawyer, the court will have to appoint one for you. We got an interval of a stream. I guess. It struck me as an excellent arrangement that the authorities should see to the details of this kind, and I told him so. He nodded and agreed that the code was all that could be desired. At first I didn't take him quite seriously. The room in which he interviewed me was much like an ordinary sitting room. Curtained windows, and a single lamp sitting on the desk. Its light fell over on the armchair which he had me sit, while his own face stayed in shadow. I had read descriptions of such scenes in books, and now at first it all seemed like a game. After our conversation, however, I had a good look at him. He was a tall man with clean-cut features, deep-set blue eyes, a big gray mustache, and abundant, almost snow-white hair, and he gave me the impression of being highly intelligent and, on the whole, likable enough. There's only one thing that put one off. His mouth had now and rather an ugly twist, but seemed to only be a sort of a nervous tick. When leaving, I very nearly held up my hand and said goodbye just in time. I remembered that I killed a man. Next day, a lawyer came to my cell, a small, plump, youngish man with sleek black hair. In spite of the heat, I was in my shirt sleeves. He was wearing a dark suit, stiff collar, and a rather showy tie with broad black and white stripes. After depositing his briefcase on my bed, he introduced himself and added that he'd perused the record of my case with the utmost care. His opinion was that it would need cautious handling, but there was every prospect of my getting off, provided I followed his advice. I thanked him and said, good, now let's get down to it. Excuse me. Sitting on the bed, he said they'd been making investigations into my private life. They had learned that my mother died recently in a home. Inquiries had been conducted at Meursault. I'm not gonna try. I'm not gonna try. And the police informed me that it showed great callousness at my mother's funeral. You must understand, the lawyer said, that I don't relish having to question you about such a matter, but as much importance, and unless I find some other way of answering the charge of callousness, I shall be handicapped in conducting your defense, and that is where you, and only you, can help me. So, wait. The most suspicious thing of him is that he didn't react much at his mother's funeral? That's their main point here? Not that he killed a guy in self-defense, but he killed a guy? That's their... So, of course, like, the case against him is that he in fact killed a man, right? but they're using some, like, fucking YouTube, like, see how this child serial killer feigns responsibility by having me, by being sad. Like, why are they doing that method to him? That's really fucking crazy. I'm guessing it's proof of him being a sociopath. I was about to say that's crazy, and then I realized that, like, autism wasn't really viewed as a human thing until, like, 40 or so years ago. That's still crazy to me. That fact is still crazy to me. So they would, like, look at traits of autism, like, specifically, like, low empathy and shit, and, like, not understanding how some things work, and they would, like, view it as sociopathy. That's what they're clocking him as right now. He went on to ask if I felt grief. He went to ask if I had felt grief on that sad occasion. The question struck me as an odd one. I'd have been much embarrassed if I had to ask anyone a thing like that. I answered that, averse in years, I'd hardly lost the habit of noting my feelings, and hardly knew what to answer. I could have truly said that I'd been quite fond of my mother, but that really didn't mean much. All normal people, I added as an afterthought, had more or less desired the death of those they loved at some time or another. Here the lawyer interrupted me, looking greatly perturbed. You must promise me not to say anything of the sort at the trial, or to the examining magistrate. I promised to satisfy him. Being fair to his lawyer, I don't think what his lawyer said here is that crazy. Like, looking at this on paper, yeah, I do hope my loved ones die a peaceful death. Because, like, admittedly, they can't live forever. The lawyer is not in the wrong here for saying that. I actually respect the lawyer somewhat. I promised to satisfy him, but explained that my physical condition at any given moment often influenced my feelings. For instance, on the day I attended Mother's funeral, I was... Is that a... Okay. I was pretty tired out and only half awake, so really I hardly took stock of what was happening. Anyhow, I could assure him of one thing, that I'd rather Mother hadn't died. The lawyer, however, looked displeased. That's not enough, he said curtly. After considering for a bit, he asked me if he could say that on day I had to keep my feelings under control. No, I said, that won't be true. He gave me a queer look, as if slightly revolted at him, and informed me in an almost hostile tone that in any case the head of the home and some of the staff would be cited as witnesses. And that might do you a very nasty turn, he concluded. Okay, never mind. This lawyer's a fucking scumbag. Never mind. In like 2 pages, they like disproved what I said. Not even 2, a page! Fuck. When I suggested that Mother's death had no connection with the charge against me, he merely replied with the remark that I never should had any dealings with the law. Sooner after this, he left, looking quite vexed. I wish he had stayed longer and I could have explained that I desired his sympathy, not for him to make a better job in my defense, but, if I might put it so, spontaneously. I could see that it got on his nerves. He couldn't make me out, and naturally enough, this irritated him. Oh! Wait, Meister's here? What? Why the fuck can't I see Meister's message? Meister, they're hiding? No, sadly. Okay. Meister's a good buddy of mine. I want them to be. Yeah, Meister's a good buddy. Look at my lawyer dog, I'm going to jail. I'm trying to manifest my bestie. When it's just the Mother's death. Okay, blah blah blah. I read that. I could see that it got on his nerves. He couldn't make me out, and naturally enough, this irritated him. Once or twice I had in mind to assure him that I was just like everybody else, quite an ordinary person, but really that would have served no great purpose, and I let it go, out of laziness as much as anything else. Later in the day, I was taken again to the examining magistrate's office. It was 2 in the afternoon, and this time the room was flooded with light. There was only a thin curtain on the window and extremely hot. After inviting me to sit down, the magistrate informed me in a very polite tone that, owing to unforeseen circumstances, my lawyer was unable to be present. I should be quite entitled, he added, to reserve my answers to questions until my lawyer could attend. To this I replied I could answer for myself. He pressed a bell push on his desk, and a young clerk came in and seated himself just behind me. Then I and the magistrate, settled back in our chairs and the examination began. He led off by remarking that I had the reputation of being taciturn, rather self-centered person, and he'd like to know what I had to say to that. I answered, well, I rarely have anything much to say, so naturally I keep my mouth shut. He smiled as on the previous occasion, and agreed that that was the best of reasons. In any case, he added, it has little or no importance. After a short silence, he suddenly leaned forward, looking me in the eyes, and said, raising his voice a little, what really interests me is you! I wasn't quite clear what he meant, so I made no comment. There are several things, he continued, that puzzle me about your crime. I feel sure that you will help me to understand them. When I replied that really it was quite simple, he asked me to give them an account of what I'd done that day. As a matter of fact, I had already told them at our first interview in a summary sort of way, of course, about Raymond, the beach shore swim, the fight, then the beachy end, and the 5 shots I'd fired. But I went over it all again, and after each phrase he nodded, quite so, quite so. When I described the body lying on the sand, he nodded more emphatically and said, good! I was tired of repeating the same story. I felt as if I had never talked so much in all my life before. After another silence, he stood up and said he'd like to help me. I interested him, and, with God's help, he would do something for me in my trouble. But first, he must put a few more questions. He began by asking bluntly if I loved my mother. Yes, I replied, like everybody else. The clerk behind me, who has been typing away at a steady pace, must just have hit the wrong keys as I heard him pushing the carrier back and crossing something out. Next, without any apparent logical connection, the magistrate sprang forth another question. Why did you fire 5 consecutive shots? I thought for a bit and explained that they weren't quite consecutive. I fired 1 at first and the other 4 after a short interval. Why did you pause between the first and second shot? I seemed to see it hovering again before my eyes, the red glow of the beach, and to feel the fiery breath of my cheeks, and this time I made no answer. During the silence that followed, the magistrate kept fidgeting, running his fingers through his hair, half rising, then staying down again, finally planting his elbows on his desk. He bent towards me with a quick expression. But why? Why did you go on firing at the prostrate man? Again, I found nothing to reply. The magistrate drew his hands across his forehead and repeated in a slightly different tone, I ask you why? I insist on your telling me. I still kept silent. Suddenly, he rose, walked to a filing cabinet standing against the opposite wall, pulled a drawer open, and took from his silver crucifix, which he was waving as he came back to the desk. Do you know who this is? His voice had completely changed. It was vibrant with emotion. Of course I do, I answered. That seemed to start him off. He began speaking at a great pace. He told me he believed in God, and that even the worst of sinners could obtain forgiveness of him. But first he must repent and become like a little child, with a simple, trustful heart open to conviction. He was leaning right across the table, brandishing his crucifix before my eyes. As a matter of fact, I had great difficulty in following his remarks, as, for one thing, the office was so stiflingly hot, and big flies were buzzing around and settling on my cheeks. Also because he rather alarmed me. Of course, I realized it was absurd to feel like this, considering that, after all, it was I who was the criminal. However, as he continued talking, I did my best to understand. I gathered that there was only one point in my confession that badly needed cleared up, the fact that I waited before firing a second time. All the rest was, so to speak, quite in order, but that completely baffled him. I started to tell him that he was wrong in insisting on this, but the point was of quite minor importance. Before I could get the words out, he had drawn himself up to his full point, and when asking me earnestly if I believed in God, when I said no, he plumped down in his chair indignantly. That was unthinkable, he said. All men believe in God, even those who reject him. Of this, he was absolutely sure if he ever came to doubt it, his life would lose all meaning. Do you wish, he asked indignantly, my life to have no meaning? Really, I couldn't see how my wishes came into it, and I told him as much. While I was talking, he thrust the crucifix again just under my nose and shouted, I, anyhow, am a Christian, and I pray him to forgive you for your sins, my poor young man. How can you not believe that he suffered for your sake? I noticed that his manner seemed genuinely so solicitous when he said, my poor young man, but I was beginning to have enough of it. The room was growing steadily hotter. As I usually do when I want to get rid of someone whose conversation bores me, I pretended to agree, at which, rather to my surprise, his face lit up. You see? Now won't you own that you must believe and put your trust in him? I must have shaken my head again, for he sank back in his chair, looking limp and dejected. For some moments there was a silence during which the typewriter, which had been clicking away all the time we talked, caught up with the last remark. Then he looked at me intently and rather sadly. Never in all my experience have I known a soul so case-hardened as yours, he said in a low tone. All the criminals who have come before me until now wept when they saw the symbol of our Lord's sufferings. I was on the point of replying that precisely because they were criminals, but then I realized that I too came under that description. Somehow it was an idea to which I could never get reconciled. To indicate, presumably, that the interview was over, the magistrate stood up. In the same weary tone, he asked me one last question. Did I regret what I had done? After thinking a bit, I said that what I felt was less regret than a kind of vexation. I couldn't find a better word for it, but he didn't seem to understand. This was as far as things went at today's interview. I came before the magistrate many times more, but on those occasions my lawyers always accompanied me. Examinations were confined to asking me to amplify my previous statements, or else the magistrate and my lawyer discussed technicalities. At such times they took very little notice of me, and in any case, the tone of the examinations changed as time went on. The magistrate seemed to have lost interest in me and to have come to some sort of decision about my case. He never mentioned God again or displayed any of the religious fervor I had found so embarrassing at our first interview. The result was that our relations became more cordial. After a few questions followed by an exchange of remarks with the lawyer, the magistrate closed the interview. My case was taking its course, as he put it. Sometimes, too, the conversation was of general order, and the magistrate and the lawyer encouraged me to join in it. I began to breathe more freely. Neither of the two men at these times showed the least hostility toward me, and everything went so smoothly, so amiably, that I had an absurd impression of being one of the family. I can honestly say that during the 11 months these examinations lasted, I got so used to them that I was almost surprised at having ever enjoyed anything better than those rare moments with the magistrate after escorting me to the door of the office. Would pat my shoulder and say in a friendly tone, "Well, Mr. Antichrist, that's all for the present," after which I was made over to my jailers. That was a good-ass way to start off the second part of this. I'm actually really surprised. It peaked at chapter 6 and it's like plateauing right now, so it's staying at the same consistency. It's actually really good. People usually describe like quality in things as plateauing, but like I view Canto 9's bosses as a plateau, and like with a peak of the Roach Emperor, of course. And those bosses are some of the best in the game. Fucking, oh, I love those bosses. Chapter 2. There are some of the things which I never cared to talk, and a few days later, after I had been sent to prison, I decided that phase of my life was one of them. However, as time went by, I came to feel that this aversion had no real substance. In point of fact, during those early days, I was hardly conscious of being in prison. I had always a vague hope of something would turn up, or some agreeable surprise. The change came soon after Marie's first and only visit. From the day when I got her letter telling me they wouldn't let her come to see me anymore because she wasn't my wife, it was from that day I realized that this cell was my last home. A dead end, so to speak. No, 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 no. On the day of my arrest, they put me in a biggish room with several other prisoners, mostly Arabs. They grinned when they saw me enter and asked me what I'd done. I told them I killed an Arab and they kept mum for a while. But presently night began to fall and one of them explained to me how to lay out my sleeping mat. By rolling up one end, one makes a sort of bolster. All night I felt bugs crawling all over my face. Some days later, I was put by myself in a cell where I slept on a plank bed hinged to the wall. The only other furniture was a latrine bucket and a tin basin. The prison stands on a rising ground, and through my little window I had glimpses of the sea. One day when I was hanging on the bars, straining my eyes towards sunlight playing on the waves, a jailer entered and said I had a visitor. I thought must be Marie, and so it was. To go to the visitor's room, I was taken along a corridor and up a flight of steps, then along another corridor. It was a very large room, lit by a big bow window and divided into 3 compartments by high iron grills running transversally. Between the 2 grills there was a gap of some 30 feet, sort of no man's land between the prisoners and their friends. I was led to a point exactly opposite Marie, who was wearing her striped dress. On my side of the rails were about a dozen other prisoners, Arabs for the most part. On Murray's side were mostly Moorish women. She was wedged between a small old woman with tight-set lips and a fat Martin without a hat, who was talking shrilly and gesticulated all the time. Because of the distance between the visitors and prisoners, I found I, too, had to raise my voice. When I came into the room, the babble of voices echoing on the bare walls, and the sunlight streaming in, falling everywhere in a harsh white glare, made me feel quite dizzy. After the relative darkness and the silence of my cell, it took me some moments to get used to these conditions. After a bit, however, I came to see each face quite clearly, lit up as if a spotlight played on it. I noticed a prison official seated at each end of the no man's land between the grills. The native prisoners and their relations on the other side were squatting opposite each other. They didn't raise their voices and, in spite of the dim, managed to converse almost in whispers. This murmur of voices coming from below made sort of an accompaniment to the conversations going on above our heads. I took stock of all this very quickly and moved a step forward towards Marie. She was pressing her brown, sun-tanned face to the bars and smiling as hard as she could. I thought she was looking very pretty, but somehow couldn't bring herself to tell her so. "Well?" she asked, pitching her voice very high. "What about it? Are you alright? Have you everything you want?" "Oh, yes, I've everything I want." We were silent for some moments. Marie went on smiling. The fat woman was bawling at the prisoner beside me, her husband, presumably a tall, fair, pleasant-looking man. "Jan refused to have him," she yelled. "That's just too bad," the man replied. "Yes, and I told her you'd take him back the moment you got out, but she wouldn't hear of it." Marie shuddered across the gap. That Raymond sent me his best wishes, and then I said, "Thanks." But my voice was drowned by my neighbors asking if he was quite fit. The fat woman gave a laugh. "Fit? I should say he is. The picture of health." Meanwhile, the prisoner on my left, a youngster with thin, girlish hands, never said a word. His eyes, I noticed, were fixed on the little old woman opposite of him. She returned his gaze with a sort of hungry passion. But I just stopped looking at them as Marie was shouting to me that we mustn't lose hope. "Certainly not," I answered. My gaze fell on her shoulders. That is 3 sentences. Anyways, I'm gonna go run for now, but glad you're enjoying your book. Enjoy your run. That is like 2 different sentences with gaze. Just saying. My gaze fell on her shoulders, and I had the sudden longings to squeeze them through the thin dress. Its silky texture fascinated me. I had a feeling that hope she spoke with the center on it. Somehow, I imagined something of the same sort was in Marie's mind. First, she went on smiling, looking straight at me. "It'll all come right, you'll see, and then we shall get married." All I could see of her now was the light flash of her teeth and the little puckers around her eyes. I answered, "Do you really think so?" But chiefly because I felt it up to me to answer something. She started talking very fast in the same high-pitched voice. "Yes, you'll be acquitted and we'll go bathing again. Sundays." The woman beside me was still yelling away, telling her husband that she left a basket for him in the prison office. She gave a list of things she brought him and told him to mind and check them carefully, as some had cost quite a lot. The youngster on my other side and his mother were still gazing mournfully at each other, and the murmur of the Arabs droned on below us. The light outside seemed to be surging against the window, seeping through and smearing the faces of the people facing it with a coat of yellow oil. I began to feel slightly squeamish, and I wish I could leave. The strident voices beside me was jarring on my ears, but on the other hand, I wanted to have the most I could of Marie's company. I have no idea how much time passed. I remembered Marie described to me her work with that set smile always on her face. There wasn't a moment's let up in the noise, shouts, conversations, always that muttering undertone. The only oasis of silence was made by the young fellow and the old woman gazing into each other's eyes. Then, one by one, the Arabs were led away. Almost everyone fell silent when the first one left. The old little woman pressed herself against the bars. At the same moment, a jailer tapped her son's shoulders. He called, "Au revoir, mother." And slipping her hand between the bars, she gave him a small, slow wave with it. No sooner was she gone than a man, hat in hand, took her place. The prisoner was led up to the empty place beside me and stared at briskly at exchange of remarks, not loud, however, as the room had become relatively quiet. Someone came and called away the man on the right, and his wife shouted at him. Didn't seem to realize it was no longer necessary to shout. "Now, mind, look after yourself, dear, and don't do anything rash." My turn came next. Marie threw me a kiss. I looked back as I walked away. She hadn't moved. Her face was pressed to the rails, her lips still parting that tense, twisted smile. Soon after this, I had a letter from her, and it was then the things I never liked to talk about began. Not that they were particularly terrible. I have no wish to exaggerate, and it's after less than the others. Still, there was one thing in those early days that was really irksome: my habit of thinking like a free man. For instance, I would suddenly be seized with a desire to go down to the beach for a swim, and merely to have imagined the sound of ripples at my feet, the smooth feel of water on my body as I struck out, and the wonderful sensation of relief that it gave brought home still more cruelly the narrowness of my cell. Still, that phase lasted a few months only. Afterward, I had prisoner's thoughts. I wonder how they interpreted the importance of God in Canto 10. I'm not sure the city has Christianity or Einkorp has something like it, but that'll definitely be important. Considering we have seen 2 examples of Christmas, I think so. We have seen 2 different examples of Christmas. 3 different. I forgot about Rudolta. 3 different examples. 2 in Limbus alone. So I'm sure it's there. I waited for the daily walk in the courtyard or a visit from my lawyer. As for the rest of it'll probably be Cartman? No, Cartman's gonna be the son. As for the rest of the time, I managed to quite well, really. I've often thought that I had been compelled to live in the trunk of a dead tree, with nothing to do but gaze up at the part of the patch of sky just overhead. Need to drink water. I'm getting little hiccups. I've been compelled to live in the trunk of a dead tree with nothing to do but gaze up at the patch of sky just overhead. I'd have to got used to it by degrees. I'd have learned to watch for the passing birds or drift clouds, as I'd come to watch for my lawyer's odd neckties, or, in another world, to wait patiently still Sunday for a spell of lovemaking with Marie. Dude, he is going through, like, one of the most torturous eras of his life, and he's like, oh, I want to fuck my wife so bad. I love him! I love him! I love him! He's great! Well, here, anyhow, I wasn't penned in a whole tree trunk. There were others in the world worse off than I. I remembered it had been one of Mother's pet ideas, she was always voicing it, that in the long run, one gets used to anything. Usually, however, I didn't think things out so far. Those first months were trying, of course, but the very effort I had to make helped me through them. For instance, I was plagued by desire for a woman, which was natural enough, considering my age. I never thought of Marie especially. I was obsessed with thoughts of this woman or that, of all the ones I've had, all the circumstances under which I'd loved them. So much so that the cell grew crowded with their— Where did we leave off? Was I talking about him having sex with Marie? Where did we leave off? Where did we leave off? I'm sorry. That scared the shit out of me. Kinda. Okay. I'll just read from, like, I'd have to get used to. Speak about other women. So much so that the crowd... Oh, thank you! Thank you for saying the exact line. So much so that the cell grew crowded with their faces, ghosts of my old passions. That unsettled me, no doubt, but at least it served to kill time. I gradually became quite friendly with the chief's jailer, who went rounds with the kitchen hands at mealtimes. It was he who brought up the subject of women. "It's what the men here grumble about most," he told me, and he said I felt like that myself. "There's something unfair about it," I added, "like hitting a man when he's down." "But that's the whole point of it," he said. "That's why you fellows are kept in prison." "I don't follow." "Liberty," he said, "means that. You're being deprived of your liberty." It had never struck me in the light, but I saw his point. "That's true," I said. "Otherwise, it wouldn't be a punishment." The jailer nodded. "Yes, you're different. You can use your brains. The others can't. Still, those fellows find a way out. They do it by themselves." With which remark, the jailer left my cell. Next day, I did like the others. The lack of cigarettes, too, was a trial. When I was brought to the prison, they took away my belt, my shoelaces, and the contents of my pockets, including my cigarettes. Once I had been given a cell to myself, I asked to be given back. Anyhow, Dog! Why the fuck did it cut it? Okay. Anyways. That's cigarettes? Okay, now I know which line to start at. The lack of cigarettes, too, was a trial. When I was brought to the prison, they took away my belt, my shoelaces, and the contents of my pockets, including my cigarettes. Once I had been given a cell to myself, I asked to be given back. Anyhow, the cigarettes. Smoking was forbidden. They informed me that perhaps was what got me down the most, in fact. I suffered really badly during the first few days. I even tore off splinters from my plank bed and sucked them. All day long I felt faint and bilious. It passed my understanding why I shouldn't be even allowed to smoke. It could have done no one any harm. Later on I understood the idea behind it. This privation too was part of my punishment. But by the time I understood, I lost the craving, so it had ceased to be a punishment. Except for these privations, I wasn't too unhappy. Yet again, there's the whole problem was how to kill time. After a while, however, once I learned the trick of remembering things, I never had a moment's boredom. Sometimes I would exercise my memory on my bedroom, staring from a corner, make the round, noting every object I saw on the way. At first, it was over in a minute or two, but each time I repeated the experience, it took a little longer. I made a point of visualizing every piece of furniture and each article upon it or in it, and then every detail of each article, and finally the details of the details, so to speak, a tiny dent or incrustation, or a chipped edge, and the exact grain and color of the woodwork. At the same time, I forced myself to keep my inventory in mind from start to finish, in the right order and omitting no item. With the result of that, after a few weeks, I could spend hours merely in listing objects in my bedroom. I found that the more I thought, the more details, half forgotten or mal-observed, floated up from my memory. There seemed no end to them. So I learned that even after a single day's experience of the outside world, a man could easily live 100 years in prison. He'd have laid up enough memories never to be bored. Obviously, in one way, that was a compensation. Then there was sleep. To begin with, I slept badly at night, and never in the day. But gradually, my nights became better, and I managed to doze off in the daytime as well. In fact, during the last months, I must have slept 16 or 18 hours out of 24. So there remained only 6 hours to fill, with meals, relieving nature, my memories, and the story of the Jek. One day, when inspecting my straw mattress, I found a bit of newspaper stuck to the underside. The paper was yellow-beige, almost transparent, but I could still make out the letter print. It was a story of a crime. The first part was missing, but I gathered that its scene was some village in Czechoslovakia. One of the villagers had left his home to try his luck abroad. After 25 years, having made a fortune, he returned to his country with his wife and child. Meanwhile, his mother and sister had been running a small hotel in the village where he was born. He decided to give them a surprise, and, leaving his wife and child in another inn, he went to stay at his mother's place, booking a room under an assumed name. His mother's sister completely failed to recognize him. At dinner evening, he showed them a large sum of money he had on him. And of course, at night they slaughtered him with a hammer. After taking the money, they flung the body into the river. Next morning, his wife came and, without thinking, betrayed the guest's identity. His mother hanged herself. His sister threw herself into the well. Must have read that story thousands of times. In one way, it sounded mostly unlikely. In another, it was plausible enough. Anyhow, to my mind, the man was asking for trouble. One shouldn't play fool tricks of that sort. So what was, with long bouts of sleep, my memories, readings of that scrap of newspaper, the tides of light and darkness, the days slipped by. I'd read, of course, then jail one ends up by losing track of time. But this end never meant anything definite to me. I grasped how days could be at once long and short. Long, no doubt, as periods to live by through, but so distended that they ended up by overlapping on each other. In fact, I never thought of days as such. Only the words yesterday and tomorrow still kept some meaning. When, one in the morning, the jailer informed me I'd been now 6 months in jail, I believed him, but the words conveyed nothing to my mind. To me, it seemed like one and the same day that had been going on since I'd been in my cell, and that I'd been doing the same thing all the time. After the jailer left me, I shined up my tin pannikin and studied my face in it. My expression was terribly serious. I thought, even when I tried to smile, I held the pannikin at different angles, but always my face had the same mournful, tense expression. The sun was setting, and it was the hour of which I'd rather not speak. The nameless hour, I called it, when the evening sounds were creeping up from all the floors of the prison in sort of a stealthy procession. I went to the barred window, and the last rays looked once again at my reflected face. It was as serious as before, and that wasn't surprising, as just then I was feeling serious. But at the same time, I heard something that I hadn't heard for months. It was the sound of a voice. My own voice. There was no mistaking it. And I recognized it as the voice that, for many a day of late, had been sounding in my ears, so I know all this time I had been talking to myself. Something had been told to come back. A remark made by the nurse at my mother's funeral. No. There is no way out. And no one could imagine what evenings are like in prison. That's fucking solid. That was a solid chapter. I'm going to take a 5-minute stretch break. One sec. Just purely to stretch a bit. I will be back. I may be able to drag May here, just maybe. Oh no, I specifically said for them to read it themselves. I'm just gonna like look at my phone while I do some stretches. Yes, Rubes, bonjour. Meister, aren't you like literally part French? Oh, you know what? Now that we're on break, let's talk about the new IDs. What about that? Fucking what is it? Here it is. First of all, this Meursault, his entire outfit is so fucking cool. And his, let's see. I love his uptie art. I love his uptie art a lot. I love the, hold on, I'm gonna fuck with y'all and I'm gonna move this up a bit. I love the dog mask. It reminds me of Musicians of Bremen, kind of. He also, like, I don't know why, but I find the dog arm to be super cool. And it seems like they apply like a certain debuff because you can see the like claw marks. You can see like the claw marks on the enemy. Also, I just think this looks sick. He has a bit of a fade. Oh wait, I didn't even realize it is Battle Sprite. He has a slight fade on the side. He's like Bada. That is straight up, that the dog could be a Salamone reference. Yeah, maybe. This punch right here, okay. We'll move it back. This punch right here reminds me a lot of, like, the same position he's in. When he does his, what's it called? Crushbound Past. I do like his skill 3-2. So it seems like he applies a special type of bleed, like claw marks. Okay, now let's check the Rhodia. God, she is hot! I wish she was fat, but like, God, she is fucking, oh my god. Wait a minute. Did my eyes deceive me? Surely not. Okay, so she applies like a effect. She applies like a brushstroke effect with the slashes, which I think looks sick. Do my eyes deceive me, or am I seeing that right? Am I tripping? Did I just see a sinking effect? Wait. I swear to God. Okay, maybe in this form. Wait! Wait, hold on. This might be a low morale state. Wait, she's bleed sinking! Finally! After all this time! That's a low morale state! Okay, let's get back to it. Break's over. Chapter 3. On the whole, I can't say those months passed slowly. Another summer was on its way almost before I realized the first one was over. And I knew that, with the first really hot days, something new was in store for me. My case was down for the last sessions of the Assize Court, and those sessions were due to end sometime in June. The day on which my trial started was one of brilliant sunshine. My lawyer assured me from the case would take only 2 or 3 days. From what I hear, he added, the court will dispatch your case as quickly as possible as it isn't the most important one on the cause list. There's a case of parricide immediately after that, which will take them some time. They came for me at 7:30 in the morning, and I was conveyed to the law courts in a prison van. The 2 policemen led me into a small room that smelled of darkness. We sat near a door through which came sounds of voices, shouts, chairs scraping on the floor, a vague hubbub which reminded me of one of those small town socials when, after the concert's over, the hall is cleared for dancing. One of my policemen told the judges hadn't arrived yet and offered me a cigarette, which I declined. After a bit, he asked me if I was feeling nervous. I said, no. And the prospect of witnessing a trial rather interested me. I never had an occasion to attend one before. Maybe, the other policeman said, but after an hour or two, one's had enough of it. After a while, a small electric bell purred in the room. They unfastened my handcuffs, opened the door, and led me to the prisoner's dock. There was a great crowd in the courtroom. Though the Venetian blinds were down, light was filtering through the chinks, and the air stifling hot already. The windows had been kept shut. I sat down, and the police officers took their stand on each side of my chair. It was then I noticed a row of faces opposite me. These people were staring hard at me, and I guess they were the jury. But somehow I didn't see them as individuals. I felt as you do just after boarding a streetcar and you're conscious of all the people on the opposite seat staring at you in the hope of finding something in your appearance to amuse them. Of course, I knew this was an absurd comparison. Venetian. Okay, thanks. Of course, I knew this was an absurd comparison. What these people were looking for in me wasn't anything to laugh at, but signs of criminality. Still, the difference wasn't so very great, and anyhow, that's the idea I got. What with the crowd and the stuffiness of the air, I was feeling a bit dizzy. I ran my eyes around the courtroom, but could hardly recognize any of the faces. At first, I could hardly believe that all the people had come on my account. It was such a new experience being a focus of interest. In the ordinary way, no one ever paid much attention to me. What a crush, I remarked to the policeman on the left, and he explained that the newspapers were responsible for it. He pointed to a group of men at the table just below the jury box. There they are! Who? I asked, and he replied, the press. One of them, he had, was an old friend of his. A moment later, the man he'd mentioned looked our way and, coming down to the dock, shook hands warmly with the policeman. The journalist was an elderly man with a rather grim expression, but his manner was quite pleasant. Just then I noticed that almost all the people in the courtroom were greeting each other, exchanging remarks and forming groups, behaving in fact as in a club where the company of others, one's taste and standing one's make one feel at ease. That no doubt explained the odd impression I had being déchopé. It's a sort of gatecrasher. Okay. Something I want to bother you all with real quick. I want you all, with me, to go back to the page where he was describing his cell. Where is it? I was obsessed by thoughts of this woman or that, of all the ones I'd had, all the circumstances under which I loved them so much so that my soul grew crowded with their faces, ghosts of my old passions. That unsettled me, no doubt, but at least it served to kill time. Right? The cell being crowded. Eyes staring at him, the gaze always constant, fingers pointed at him. While outside, he visualizes the city he's once lived in, while being pursued for this crime. Do y'all see it, or am I like turbo geeking right now? Let's see. That no doubt explained the sort of odd impression I had being a déchopé. A sort of gatecrasher. However, the journalist addressed me quite amiably and said he hoped all would go well for me. I thanked him and he had a smile. You know, we've been featuring you a bit. We're always rather short of copy in the summer, and there's been precious little to write about except your case and the one that's coming on after it. I expect you've heard about it. It's a case of parricide. He drew my attention to one of the group at the press table, a plump small man with a huge black rimmed glasses who made me think of an overfed weasel. That fellow's the special correspondent of one of Paris' dailies. As a matter of fact, he didn't come on your account. He was sent for the parasite case, but they asked him to cover yours as well. It was on the tip of my tongue to say that was very kind of them, but then I thought it would sound silly. I have something to say after we finish this chapter. With a friendly wave of his hand, he left us, and for some minutes nothing happened. Then, accompanied by some colleagues, my lawyer bustled in his gown. He went up to press the table and shook hands with the journalists. They remained laughing and chattering together, all seemingly very much at home here, until a bell rang shrilly and everyone went to his place. My lawyer came up to me, shook hands, and advised me to answer all the questions as briefly as possible, not to volunteer information, and to only rely on him to see me through. I heard chairs scrape on my left, and a tall, thin man wearing pince-nez settled the folds of his red gown and as he took his seat. The public prosecutor, I gathered. A clerk of the court announced that their honors were entering, and at the same moment, two big electric fans buzzing overhead. Fucking God. It always pisses me off when you have to call a judge your honor. Fucking elite dick riding that's like legally binding. 3 judges, 2 in black and 3rd in scarlet, with briefcases under their arms, entered and walked briskly to the bench. And walked briskly to the bench, which was several feet above the level of the courtroom floor. The man in scarlet took the central, high-backed chair, placed his cap of office on the table, ran a handkerchief over his small, bald crown, and announced that the hearing would now begin. The journalists had their fountain pens ready. They all wore the same expression of slightly ironical indifference, with the exception of one, as a much younger man than his colleagues in gray flannels with a blue tie, who, leaving his pen on the table, was gazing hard at me. He had a plain, rather chunky face. What held my attention were his eyes, very pale, clear eyes riveted on me, though not betraying any definite emotion. For a moment I had an odd impression, as if I were being scrutinized by myself. That, and the fact that I was unfamiliar with my court procedure, may explain why I didn't follow very well with the opening phases. The drawing of lots for the jury, the various questions put by the presenting judge to the prosecutor, and the foreman of jury and my counsel. Each time he spoke, all the jurymen's heads swung around together toward the bench. The hurried reading of the charge sheet, in the course of which I recognized some familiar names of people and places, and some supplementary questions put to my lawyer. Next, the judge announced that the court would call over the witness list. Some names read out by the clerk rather surprised me. From amongst the crowd, which until now I had seen as a mere blur of faces, rose one after the other. Raymond, Meursault, Salamano? What the fuck? The doorkeeper from the home, old Perez, and Marie. Why is Salamano here? Who gave me a little nervous wave of her hand before following the others out by a side door. I was thinking how strange it was I hadn't noticed any of them before when I heard the last name called, that of Celeste. As he rose, I noticed beside him a quaint little woman with a managed coat and brisk, decided hair who had shared my table at the restaurant. She had her eyes fixed on me, I noticed, but I hadn't time to worry about her. The judge started speaking again. That's the Vespa felon. The robotic woman, right? I think so. But I hadn't time to wonder about her. The judge started speaking again. He said that the trial proper was about to begin. When your court case so insane they break a dog to testify? He need hardly say he expected the public to refrain from any demonstration whatsoever. He explained that he was there to supervise the proceedings as a sort of umpire, as he would take a scrupulously impartial view of the case. The verdict of the jury would be interpreted by him in a spirit of justice. Finally, at least the sign of a disturbance would have the court cleared. The day is stoking up, some of the public were fanning themselves with newspapers, and there was a constant rustle of crumpled paper. On a sign from the presiding judge, the clerk of the court brought 3 fans of plaited straw, which the 3 judges promptly put into action. My examination began at once. The judges questioned me calmly and even, I thought, with a hint of cordiality. For the nth time, I was asked to give particulars of my identity. And, though heartily sick of this formality, I realized that it was natural enough. After all, it would be shocking for the court to be trying the wrong man. The judge then launched into an account of what I'd done, stopping after every 2 or 3 sentences to ask me, "Is that correct?" To which I always replied, "Yes, sir," as my lawyer had advised me. It was a long business as the judge lingered on each detail. Excuse me, sorry. But I was sometime... Meanwhile, the journalist scribbled busily away, but I was sometimes conscious of the eyes of the youngest fixed on me, also those of the queer little robot. The jurymen, however, were all gazing at the red-robed judge, and I was once again reminded of the row of passengers on one side of the tram. Presently, he gave a slight cough, turned some pages of his file, and still fanning his face, addressed me gravely. He now proposed, he said, to trench on certain matters which, on a superficial view, might seem foreign to case, but actually were highly relevant. I guessed that he was going to talk about Mother, and at the same moment realized how odious it was to find this. I would find this. His first question was, why had I sent my mother to an institution? I replied that the reason was simple. I had enough money to see that she was properly looked after at home. Then he asked if parting hadn't caused me distress. I explained to her that neither Mother nor I expected much of one another, or, for that matter, of anybody else. So both of us had gotten used to the new conditions easily enough. The judge then said that he had no wish to press the point, and asked the prosecutor if he could think of any more questions that should be put on me at the stage. The prosecutor, who had his back half turned to me, said, without looking my direction, that, subject to his honor's approval, he would like to know if he'd gone back to the stream with the intention of killing the Arab. I said, no. In that case, why had I taken the revolver with me, and why go back precisely to that spot? I said it was a matter of pure chance. The prosecutor then observed in a nasty tone, very good. That will be all for the present. I couldn't quite follow what came next. Anyhow, after some palavering among the bench, the prosecutor and my counsel, the presenting judge, announced that the court would now rise. There was an adjournment till the afternoon when evidence would be taken. Almost before I knew what was happening, I was rushed out to the prison van, which drove me back, and I was given my midday meal. After a short time, just enough for me to realize how tired I was feeling, they came for me. I was back in the same room, confronting the same faces, and the whole thing started again. But the heat had meanwhile much increased, and by some miracle, fans had been procured for everyone. The jury, my lawyer, the prosecutor, and some of the journalists too. The young man and the robot woman were still at their places, but they were not fanning themselves, and as before, they never took their eyes off me. I wiped the sweat from my face, but I was barely conscious of where or who I was until I heard the warden of the home called to the witness box. When asked if my mother had complained about my conduct, he said, yes, but that didn't mean much. Almost all the inmates in the home had grievances against their relatives. The judge asked him to be more explicit. Did she reproach me with having sent her to go home? And he said yes, again. But this time he didn't qualify his answer. To another question, he replied that on the day of the funeral, he was somewhat surprised by my calmness, asked to explain what he meant by my calmness. The warden lowered his eyes and stared at his shoes for a moment. Then he explained that I hadn't wanted to see Mother's body or shed a single tear, and that I'd left immediately the funeral ended without lingering at her grave. Another thing had surprised him. One of the undertaker's men told him that I didn't know my mother's age. There's a short silence, then the judge asked him if he might take it that he was referring to the prisoner in the dock. The warden seemed puzzled by this, and the judge explained it. It's a formal question, and I am bound to put it. The prosecutor then asked if he had any questions to put, and he answered loudly, certainly not! I have all I want! His tone and the look of triumph on his face as he glanced at me were so marked that I felt as if I hadn't felt for ages. Foolish desire to burst into tears. For the first time, I'd realized how all these people loathed me. After asking the jury and my lawyer if they had any questions, the judge heard the doorkeeper's evidence. On stepping into the box, the man threw a glance at me and looked away, replying to questions. He said that I declined to see Mother's body. I'd smoked cigarettes and slept and drunk coffee à lait. It was then I felt sort of a wave of indignation spreading through the courtroom, and for the first time I understood that I was guilty. They got the doorkeeper to repeat what he had said about the coffee and my smoking. The prosecutor turned to me again with a gloating look in his eyes. My counsel asked the doorkeeper if he, too, hadn't smoked. But the prosecutor took strong exception to this. I'd like to know, he cried indignantly, who is on trial in this court? Or does my friend think that by asperring a witness for prosecution, he will shake the evidence, the abundant and cogent evidence against his client? Nonetheless, the judge told the doorkeeper to answer the question. The old fellow fidgeted a bit. Then, well, I don't know, I'd ought to have done it, he mumbled. But I did take a cigarette from the young gentleman when he offered it, just out of politeness. The judge asked me if I had any comment to make. None, I said, except that the witness is quite right. It's true I offered him a cigarette. The doorkeeper looked at me with surprise and sort of gratitude. Then, after hemming and hawing for a bit, he volunteered the statement that it was he who'd suggested I should have some coffee. My lawyer was exultant. The jury will appreciate, he said, the importance of this admission. The prosecutor, however, was promptly on his feet again. Quite so, he boomed above her head. The jury will appreciate it, and they will draw the conclusion that though a third party might inadvertently offer him a cup of coffee, the prisoner, in common decency, should have refused it. If only out of respect for the dead body of the poor woman who brought him into the world, after which the doorkeeper went back to his seat. When Thomas Perez was called, a court officer had to help him to the box. Perez stated that, though he'd been a great friend of my mother, he had met me only once on the day of the funeral. Asked how I behaved that day, he said, well, I was most upset, far too much upset to notice things. My grief sort of blinded me, I think. It had been a great shock, my dear friend's death. In fact, I fainted during the funeral, so I hardly noticed the young gentleman at all. The prosecutor asked me to tell the court if he'd been to see me weep. When Perez answered no, and empathetically, I trust the jury will take note of this reply. My lawyer rose at once and asked Perez in a tone that seemed to be needlessly aggressive. Now think well, my man. Can you swear you saw he didn't shed a single tear? Perez answered, no. At this, some people tittered, and my lawyer, pushing back one sleeve of his gown, said sternly, that is typical of the way this case is being conducted. No attempt is being made to elicit the true facts. The prosecutor ignored this remark. He was making dabs with his pencil on the cover of his brief, seemingly quite indifferent. There was a break of 5 minutes, during which my lawyer told me the case was going very well indeed. Then Celeste was called. He was announced as a witness for the defense. The defense meant me. Now and again, Celeste threw me a glance. He kept squeezing his Panama hat between his hands and as it gave evidence. He was in his best suit, the one he wore sometimes off on Sunday when he went with me to the races, but evidently he hadn't been able to get his collar on. The top of his shirt, I noticed, was secured only by a brass stud. Asked if I was one of the customers, he said, yes, and a friend as well. I asked to state his opinion of me. He said that I was alright, and when told to explain what he meant by that, he replied that everyone knew what that meant. Was I a secretive sort of man? No, he answered. I shouldn't call him that, but he isn't one to waste his breath, like a lot of folks. The prosecutor asked if I always settled my monthly bill at his restaurant when he presented it. Celeste said, oh, he paid on the nail alright, but the bills were just details like between him and me. Then he was asked to say what he thought about the crime. He placed his hand on the rail of the box and could see he had a speech already. To my mind, it was just an accident, or stroke of bad luck, if you prefer. And a thing like that takes you off guard. He wanted to continue, but the judge cut him off. Quite so. That's all. Thank you. Celeste, you're a fucking real one. Oh god, he's so real. Oh, he's so real. Oh, fuck. Oh, you're a real one in this court of contempt. Oh my fuck. Holy shit! Oh, Celeste, I love you. I was low-key crying reading one of the passages, but that, oh, fuck. Oh, you're the goat! Oh, fuck! That might have just saved Meursault's life. Like, low-key. That right there might have saved his life. Holy shit! Oh my god. If this character doesn't get adapted, I'm going to fucking lose it. Celeste is the fucking goat. Oh my god. Excuse me. For a bit, Celeste seemed flabbergasted, then he explained that he hadn't finished what he wanted to say. They told him to continue, but to make it brief. He only repeated that it was just an accident. That's as it may be, the judge observed, but what we are here for is to try such accidents. According to law, you can stand down. Celeste turned his gaze to me. His eyes were moist and his lips trembling. It was exactly as if he said, "Well, I've done my best for you, old man. I'm afraid it wasn't much help. I'm sorry." I'm like, you know, like, when parents, like, hold their son in the air? Like, the fucking, like, Simba shit? That's what I'm doing Celeste, but he's, like, a fully grown man. I thought nothing of Celeste in previous chapters. Like, okay, he's a cool owner of a restaurant. This is the realest character in the fucking book. Oh my god. He stood up, said it. You are all fucking crazy. It sat down. like, this entire court scene has been so suffocating. And that is like, we've been underwater for so long. Barely had a chance to get a breath before we got shrunk back down. We just had the biggest bubble of air present itself before us, and we were able to, like fucking Mario or Sonic or some bullshit. We were able to fucking refuel completely. God, that felt good. Oh my god. Thank you, Celeste. Thank you. I didn't say anything or make any movement, but for the first time in my life, I wanted to kiss a man. I don't blame you! I really don't blame you! He's fucking awesome! Oh my god! The judge repeated his order to stand down, and Celeste returned to his place amongst the crowd. During the rest of the hearing, he remained there, leaning forward, elbows on knees and his Panama between his hand, not missing a word of the proceeding. It was Marie's turn next. She had a hat on and still looked quite pretty, though I much preferred her with her hair free. From where I was, I had glimpses of the soft curve of her breast. This is the fifth time! Fifth time he's mentioned her boobs. Holy fuck, he's John Yearn. Jesus Christ. And her underlip had the little pout that always fascinated me. She appeared very nervous. The first question was, how long had she known me? Since the time she was first in her office, she replied. Then the judge asked what were the relations between us, and she said she was my girlfriend. Answering another question, she admitted promising to marry me. The prosecutor, who had been studying a document in front of him, asked her rather sharply when our liaison had been begun. She gave the date. He observed with a would-be casual air that apparently she meant the day following my mother's funeral. After letting this sink in, he remarked in a slightly ironic tone that obviously this was a delicate topic and he could enter into the young lady's feelings, and here his voice grew sterner. His duty obliged him to waive considerations of delicacy. After making this announcement, he asked Marie to give a full account of our doings on the day when I had intercourse with her for the first time. Why? I'm sorry, that's just absurd. I'm sorry. Marie wouldn't answer at first, but the prosecutor insisted, and when she told them that we had met at the Babs, gone together to the pictures, and then to my place, He informed the court that, as a result of certain statements made by Marie at the proceedings before the magistrate, he had studied the movie programs of the day and, turning to Marie, asked her to name the film that we had gone to see. In a very low voice, she said it was a picture of Ferdinando in it. By the time she had finished, the courtroom was so still you could have had heard a pin drop. Looking very grave, the prosecutor drew up to his full height and pointed at me, said in such a tone that I could have sworn he was genuinely moved. Gentlemen of the jury, I would have you note that on the day after his mother's funeral, that man was visiting the swimming pool, starting a liaison with a girl, and going to a comic film. That is all I wish to say. When he sat down, there was the same dead silence. Then all of a sudden, Marie burst into tears. He'd got it all wrong, she said. It wasn't a bit like that, really. He bullied her into saying the opposite of what she meant. She knew me very well, and she was sure I hadn't done anything really wrong, and so on. At a sign from the presiding judge, one of the court officers led her away, and the hearing continued. Hardly anyone seemed to listen to Meursault. Next witness, he said that I was a respectable young fellow, and what's more, a very decent chap. Nor did they pay any attention to Salamano when he told me how kind I'd always been to his dog, or when, in answer to a question about my mother and myself, he said that mother and I had very little in common, and he explained why I'd fixed up her to enter the home. You've got to understand, he added. You've got to understand, but no one seemed to understand. He was told to stand down. Raymond was next and last witness. Raymond, you are a scumbag. You are a piece of shit. You are the worst of the worst scum known to man. You are a woman beater. You are a gangster. You are a pimp. You take out your rage on undeserving people quite frequently. However, I ask you in this short time, clutch. For the love of God, clutch. Please, if you can hear me, Raymond, if it's possible, if there's a way, if there is a God, Raymond will clutch this up. He gave me a little wave of his hand and led off by saying I was innocent. The judge rebuked him. You are here to give evidence, not your views on the case, and you must confine yourself to answering the questions put you. He was then asked to make clear his relations with the deceased, and Raymond took this opportunity of explaining that it was he, not I, against whom the dead man had a grudge, because he, Raymond, had beaten up his sister. The judge asked him if the deceased had no reason to dislike me too. Raymond told him that my presence on the beach the morning was a pure coincidence. How comes it then, the prosecutor inquired, that the letter which led up to this tragedy was the prisoner's work? Raymond replied that this, too, was due to mere chance, to which the prosecutor retorted that in this case, chance, or mere coincidence, seemed to play a remarkably large part. Was it by chance that I hadn't intervened when Raymond assaulted his mistress? Did this convenient term chance account for my having vouched for Raymond at the police station, having made on that occasion statements extravagantly favorable to him? In conclusion, he asked Raymond to state what were his means of livelihood. On describing himself as a warehouseman, the prosecutor informed the jury it was common knowledge that the witness lived on the immoral earnings of women. I, he said, was this man's intimate friend and associate. In fact, the whole background of the crime was of the most squalid description. And what made it even more odious was the personality of the prisoner, an inhuman monster wholly without a moral sense. Raymond began to expatiate, and my lawyer to protest it. They were told that the prosecutor must be allowed to finish his remarks. I am nearly done, he said. Turned to Raymond. Was the prisoner your friend? Certainly. We were the best of pals, as they say. The prosecutor then put me the same question. I looked hard at Raymond, and he did not turn away. Then, yes, I answered. The prosecutor turned toward the jury. Not only did the man before you in the dock indulge the most shameful orgies on the day following his mother's death, he killed a man cold-bloodedly in pursuance of some sordid vendetta in the underworld of prostitutes and pimps. That gentleman of the jury is the type of man the prisoner is. No sooner had he sat down than my lawyer, out of all patience, raised his arms so high that his sleeves fell back, showing the full length of his starched shirt cuffs. "Is my client on trial for having buried his mother or for killing a man?" he asked. "Finally, you say something good." There were some titters in court, but then the prosecutor sprang to his feet and, draping his gown round him, said he was amazed at his friend's ingenuousness in failing to see that these two elements of the case was a vital link. They hung together psychologically, if he might put it so. "In short," he concluded, speaking with great vehemence, "I accused the prisoner of behaving at his mother's funeral in a way that showed he was already a criminal at heart." These words seemed to take much effect on the jury and the public. My lawyer merely suggested his shoulders and wiped the sweat from his forehead, but obviously he was rattled, and I had a feeling things weren't going well for me. Soon after this incident, the court rose. As I was being taken from the courthouse to the prison van, I was conscious for a few brief moments of once familiar feel of summer evening out of doors, and sitting in the darkness of my moving cell, I recognized, echoing in my tired brain, all characteristic sounds of a town I'd love, and of a certain hour of the day, which I had always particularly enjoyed: the shouts of the newspaper boys in the airy languid air, the last calls of birds in the public garden, the cries of sandwich vendors, the screech of streetcars at the steep corners of the upper town, and the faint rustling overhead as the darkness sifted down upon the harbor. All these sounds made my return to prison like a blind man's journey along a route which every inch he knows by heart. Oh. Oh, that hit. Yes, this was the evening hour when, how long ago it seemed, I always felt so well content with life. Then what awaited me was a night of easy, dreamless sleep. This was the same hour, but with a difference. I was returning to a cell, and what awaited me was a night haunted by forebodings of the coming day. And so I learned that familiar paths traced in the dusk of summer evenings may lead as well to prisons as to innocent, untroubled sleep. There is 32 pages left of this book. Maybe even less. Let me check what number the final page is. 154. Okay. We're on like 123. So that's 31 pages. We can finish this. It is always interesting, even in the prisoner's dock, to hear oneself being talked about. And certainly in the speeches of my lawyer and the prosecuting counsel, a great deal was said about me, more, in fact, about me personally than about my crime. Really, there wasn't any very great difference between the two speeches. Counsel for the defense raised his arms to heaven and pleaded for guilty, but with extenuating circumstances, the prosecutor made similar circumstances. He agreed that I was guilty, but denied extenuating circumstances. One thing about this phase of the trial was rather irksome. Quite often, interested as I was in what they had to say, I was tempted to put in a word myself, but my lawyer had advised me not to. "You won't do your case any good by talking," he had warned me. In fact, there seemed to be a conspiracy to exclude me from the proceedings. I wasn't to have any say, my fate was to be decided out of hand. It was quite an effort at times for me to refrain from cutting them all short, and saying, "But damn it all, who's on trial in this court? I'd like to know. It's a serious matter for a man being accused of murder, and I have something really important to tell you." However, on second thoughts, I found I had nothing to say. In any case, I must admit that hearing oneself talk about loss loses interest very soon. Knowing you didn't even get a last glance, just a maddening recollection by sound only. I'd lose it. The only things that really caught my attention were occasional phrases, his gestures, and some elaborate. Okay, let's see. In any case, I must admit that hearing oneself talked about loses its interest very soon. The prosecutor's speech especially began to bore me before he was halfway through it. The only things that really caught my attention were occasional phrases, his gestures, and some elaborate tirades, but there were isolated patches. What he was aiming at, I gathered, was to show that my crime was premeditated. I remember his saying at one moment, I can prove this, gentlemen of the jury, to the hilt. First, you have the facts of the crime, which are as clear as daylight, and then you have what I may call the night side of the case, the dark workings of a criminal mentality. He began by summing up the facts. From my mother's death onward, he stressed my heartlessness, my inability to state my mother's age, my visit to the swimming pool where I met Marie, our matinee at the pictures where a Fernando film was showing, and finally my return with Marie to my rooms. I didn't quite follow his remarks at first, as he kept on mentioning the prisoner's mistress, whereas for me, she was just Marie. I would beat the fuck out of him! If my wonderful, beautiful, wonderful wife is getting called my mistress, I am, like, I'm coming for you. Then he came to the subject of Raymond. It seemed to me that his way of treating the facts showed a certain shrewdness. All he said sounded quite plausible. I'd written that letter in conclusion with Raymond so as to entice his mistress to his room and subject her to ill treatment by a man of more than dubious reputation. Then, on the beach, I'd provoke a brawl with Raymond's enemies, in the course of which Raymond was wounded. I'd asked him for his revolver and gone back by myself with the intention of using it. Then I'd shot the Arab. After the first shot, I waited. Then, to be certain of making a good job of it, I fired 4 more shots deliberately, point blank, and in cold blood at my victim. That is my case, he said. I have described to you the series of events which led this man to kill the deceased, fully aware of what he was doing. I emphasize this point. We are not concerned with an act of homicide committed on sudden impulse, which might serve as an extenuation. I ask you to note, gentlemen of the jury, that the prisoner is an educated man. You have observed the way in which he answered the questions. He is intelligent and knows the values of his works. And I repeat that it is quite impossible to assume that, when he committed the crime, he was unaware of what he was doing. I noticed the way he laid stress on my intelligence. It puzzled me rather why he would count as a good point in an ordinary person should be used against an accused man as an overwhelming proof of his guilt. While thinking this over, I missed what he said until I heard him exclaim indignantly, "And he uttered a word of regret for his odious crime? Not one word, gentlemen, not once in the course of these proceedings did the man show the least contrition." Turning toward the clock, he slammed a finger at me and went on in the same strain. I really couldn't understand why he harped on this point so much. Of course, I had to own that he was right. I didn't feel much regret for what I'd done. Still, to my mind, he overdid it. And I'd like to have a chance to explain to him, in a quite friendly, almost affectionate way, that I have never been able to really regret anything at all in my life. I've always been far too much absorbed in the present moments or the immediate future to think back. Of course, in the position to which I had been forced, there was no question of my speaking to anyone in that tone. I hadn't the right to show anyone any friendly feeling or possess good intentions, and I tried to follow what came next, as my prosecutor was now considering what he'd call my soul. He said he'd literally... Camus is one of the few writers that I enjoy reading and doesn't feel forced to read for grades. I agree. He said he'd studied it closely and found it blank. "Literally nothing, gentlemen of the jury. Really," he said, "I had no soul. There's nothing human about me. Not one of the moral qualities which normal men possess he had any place in my mentality. No doubt," he added, "we should not reproach him with this. We cannot blame a man for lacking what it was never in his power to acquire. But in a criminal court, the wholly passive ideal of tolerance must give place to a sterner, loftier ideal, that of justice, especially when this lack of every decent instinct is such that of a man before you, a menace to society." He proceeded to discuss my conduct toward my mother, repeating what he had said in the course of the hearing, but he spoke at much greater length of my crime, at such length indeed that I lost thread and was conscious only of the steadily increasing heat. A moment came when the prosecutor paused and, after a short silence, said in a low, vibrant voice, "This same court, gentlemen, will be called on to try tomorrow the most odious of crimes, the murder of a father by his son." What? To his mind, such a crime was almost imaginable, but he ventured to hope justice would be meted out without paltering. Yet he was bold to say the horror that even the crime of parricide inspired in him paled besides the loathing inspired by my callousness. This man who is morally guilty of his mother's death is no less unfit to have a place in this community than that other man who did to the death the father that begat him. And indeed, the one crime led on to the other. The first of these two criminals, the man in the dock, set a precedent. If I may put it so, and authorize the second crime, yes, gentlemen, I am convinced, here he raised his voice, his tone, that you will not find I am exaggerating the case against the prisoner when I say that he is also guilty of the murder to be tried tomorrow in this court, and I look to you for a verdict accordingly. Prosecutor paused again, to wipe the sweat off his face. He then explained that his duty was a painful one, but he would do it without flinching. This man has, I repeat, no place in a community whose basic principles he flouts with compunction, nor, heartless as he is, has he any claim to mercy. I ask you to impose him the extreme penalty of the law, and I ask without a qualm. In the course of my long career, in which it has often been my duty to ask for a capital sentence, never have I felt the painful duty weigh so little on my mind as in the present case, and demanding a verdict of murder without any extenuating circumstances, I am following not only the dictates of my conscience and the sacred obligation, but also those of the natural and righteous indignation I feel at the sight of a criminal devoid of the least spark of human feeling. When the prosecutor sat down, there was a longish silence. Personally, I was quite overcome by the heat and my amazement of what I'd been hearing. The presiding judge gave a short cough and asked me in a very low tone if I had anything to say. I rose and I felt in the mood to speak. I said the first thing that came across my mind, that I had no intention of killing the Arab. The judge replied that the statement would be taken into consideration by the court. Meanwhile, he would be glad to hear, when my counsel addressed the court, what the motives were of my crime. So far, he must admit, he hadn't fully understood the grounds of my defense. I tried to explain that it was because of the sun, but I spoke too quickly and read my words into each other. I was only too conscious that it sounded nonsensical, and in fact, I heard people tittering. My lawyer shrugged his shoulders, then he was directed to address the court in his turn, but all he did was point out the lateness of the hour and to ask for adjournment till the following afternoon. To this, the judge agreed. Okay. 5-minute stretch break. No, I'm just gonna stretch, then I'm gonna continue. It's too good. Jesus Christ, there's like 24 pages left. When I was brought back the next day, the electric fans were still churning up the heavy air and the jurymen playing their gaudy little fans in sort of steady rhythm. The speech for the defense seemed to me interminable. At one moment, however, I pricked up my ears. It was when I heard him say, "It is true, I killed a man." He went on in the same string, saying as I when he referred to me. It seemed so queer that I bent toward the policeman on my right and asked him to explain. He told me to shut up, then after a moment whispered, "They all do that." It seemed to me that the idea behind it was still further to exclude me from the case, to put me off the map, so to speak, by substituting the lawyer for myself. Anyway, it hardly mattered. I already felt worlds away from this courtroom and its tedious proceedings. My lawyer, in any case, struck me as feeble to the point of being ridiculous. He hurried through his plea of provocation, and then he too started into about my soul, but I had an impression that he had much less talent than the prosecutor. I, too, he said, have closely studied this man's soul, but unlike my learned friend from the prosecution, I have found something there. Indeed, I may say that I have read the prisoner's mind like an open book. What he read there was that I was an excellent young fellow, a steady, conscientious worker who did his best by his employer, that I was troubled with everyone sympathetic, that I was popular with everyone and sympathetic in others' troubles. According to him, I was a dutiful son who had supported his mother as long as he was able. After anxious consideration, I had reached the conclusion that, by entering a home, the old lady would have comforts that my means didn't permit me to provide for her. I am an astounded gentleman, he added. By the attitude taken up by my learned friend in referring to this home, surely if proof being needed of the excellence of such institutions, we need only remember that they are promoted and financed by a government department. I noticed that he made no reference to the funeral, and this seemed to me a serious omission. But what with his long-windedness, the endless days and hours they had been discussing my soul and the rest of it, I found myself I found that my mind had grown blurred. Everything was dissolving into a grayish, watery haze. Only one incident stands out. Toward the end, while my counsel rambled on, I heard the tin trumpet of an ice cream vendor in the street. A small, shrill sound cutting across the flow of words, and then a rush of memories went through my mind. Memories of a life which was mine no longer and had once. This? Oh, shit, we actually got through this. Sorry. Memories of a life which was no longer and had once provided me with the surest, humblest pleasures. Warm smells of summer, my favorite streets, the sky at evening, Marie's dresses and her laugh. The futility of what was happening here seemed to take me by the throat. I felt like vomiting, and I had only one idea, to get it over, to go back to my cell, and sleep, and sleep. Dimly I heard my counsel making his last appeal. Gentlemen of the jury, surely you will not send to his death a decent, hard-working young man, because for one tragic moment he lost his self-control? Is he not sufficiently punished by the lifelong remorse that is to be his lot? I confidently await your verdict, the only verdict possible, that of homicide without extenuating circumstances. The court rose and the lawyer sat down, looking thoroughly exhausted. Some of his colleagues came to him and shook his hand. You put up a magnificent show, old man. Holy shit. That was bad. God. I'd like to remind everyone I have a lisp. I heard one of them say, another lawyer even called me to the witness. Fine, wasn't it? I agreed, but insincerely, I was far too tired to judge if it had been fine or otherwise. Meanwhile, the day was ending and the heat becoming less intense. By some vague sounds that reached me from the street, I knew that the cool of the evening had set in. We all sat on waiting, and what we all were waiting for really concerned nobody but me. I looked around the courtroom. It was exactly as it had been on the first day. I met the eyes of the journalist in gray and the robot woman. This reminded me that not once during the whole hearing had I tried to catch Marie's eye. It wasn't that I had forgotten her, only I was too preoccupied. I saw her now, seated between Celeste and Raymond. She gave me a little wave of her hand as if to say at last, "Aww." She was smiling, but I could tell she was rather anxious. But my heart seemed to turn to stone, and I couldn't even return her smile. Aww. The judges came back to their seats. Someone read out the jury very rapidly. A string of questions I caught word here and there. Murder of malice, aforethought, provocation, extenuating circumstances. The jury went out, and I was taken to the little room where I had already waited. My lord came to see me. He was very talkative and showed me more cordiality and confidence than ever before. He assured me that all would go well and I'd get off with a few years imprisonment or transportation. I asked him what were the chances of getting the sentence quashed. He said there was no chance of that. He had not raised any point of law, as this was to prejudice the jury, and it was difficult to get a judgment quashed except on technical grounds. I saw his point and agreed, looking at the matter disappointedly. I shared his view, otherwise there would be no litigation. In any case, the lawyer said, you can appeal in the ordinary way, but I convinced the verdict will be favorable. We waited for quite a while, a good 3/4 of an hour, I should say. Then a bell rang. My lawyer left me saying, the foreman of the jury will read out the answers. You'll be called on after that to hear the judgment. Some doors banged. I heard people hurrying down the flights of steps, but couldn't tell whether they were nearby or distant. Then I heard a voice droning away in the courtroom. When the bell rang again, I stepped back into the dock. The silence of the courtroom closed in around me, and with that silence came a queer sensation. When I noticed that, For the first time, the young journalist kept his eyes averted. I didn't look in Marie's direction. In fact, I had no time to look, as the presiding judge had already stated, pronouncing a rigmarole to the effect, in the name of the French people, I was to be decapitated in some public place. It seemed to me then that I could interpret the look of the faces of those present. It was one of the most respectful sympathy. The policeman, too, handed me very gently. The lawyer placed his hand on my wrist. I had stopped thinking altogether. I heard the judge's voice asking if I had anything more to say. After thinking for a moment, I answered, no. Then the policeman led me out. Oh, it's oh, fuck. This can't be. Oh my fucking god. I have just refused for the third time to see the prison chaplain. I have nothing to say to him, don't feel like talking, and shall be seeing him quite soon enough, anyway. The only thing that interests me now is the problem of circumventing the machine, learning if there's inevitable amidst a loophole. They have moved me to another cell, and this one, lying on my back, I can see the sky, and there is nothing else to see. All my times I spent in watching the slowly changing colors of the sky as day moves on to night, I put my hands behind my head, gaze up, and wait. The problems of a loophole obsesses me. I'm always wondering if there's been cases of condemned prisoners escaping from the implicable machinery of justice at the very last moment. Breaking through the police cordon, vanishing in the nick of time before the guillotine falls, often and often I blame myself for not having given more attention to the accounts of public executions. One should always take an interest in such matters. There's never any knowing what one may come to. Like everyone else, I'd read descriptions of executions in papers, but technical books dealing with the subject must certainly exist, only I never felt sufficiently interested to look them up, and in these books I might have found escape stories. Surely they'd have told me that in one case anyhow, the wheels had stopped, that once, if only once, in that inexorable march of events, chance or luck had played a happy part, just once! In a way, I think that a single instance would have satisfied me. My emotion would have done rest. The paper was often talk of a debt owed to society, a debt which, according to them, must be paid by the offender. But talk of that sort doesn't touch the imagination. No, the one that counted for me was the possibility of making a dash for it and defeating their bloodthirsty right. Of a mad stampede to freedom that would anyhow give me a natural moment's hope, the gambler's last throw. Naturally, all that hope would come to was to be knocked down at the corner of the street or picked off by a bullet in my back. But, all things considered, even this luxury was forbidden me. I was caught in the rat trap irrevocably. Try as I might, I couldn't stomach this brutal certitude. For really, when one came to think of it, there was a disproportion between the judgment on which it was based and the unalterable sequence of events starting from the moment when that judgment was delivered. The fact that the verdict was read out at 8 p.m. rather than at 5, the fact that it might have been quite different, that it was given by men who changed their underclothes and was credited to so vague an entity as the French people. For that matter, why not the Chinese or the German people? All these facts seemed to deprive the court's decision of its gravity. Yet I could but recognize that from the moment the verdict was given, its effects became as cogent, as tangible, as For example, this wall against which I was lying, pressing my back into. When such thoughts crossed my mind, I remembered a story Mother used to tell me about my father. I never set eyes on him. Perhaps the only things I really knew about him were what Mother told me. One of these were that he'd gone to see a murderer executed. The mere thought of it turned his stomach, but he'd seen it through, and on coming home, he was violently sick. At the time, I found my father's conduct rather disgusting, but now I understood it. It was so natural. How had I failed to recognize that nothing more important than an execution that, viewed from one angle, it's the only thing that can genuinely interest a man, and I decided that if I ever got out of jail, I'd attend every execution that took place. I was unwise, no doubt, even to consider this possibility. For the moment, I'd pictured myself in freedom, standing behind a double rank of policemen on the right side of the line, so to speak. The mere thought of being an onlooker who comes to see the show and can go home and vomit afterward filled my mind with a wild, absurd exultation. It was a stupid thing to let my imagination run away from me like that. A moment later, I had a shivering fit and had to wrap myself closely in my blanket, but my teeth went on chattering. Nothing would stop them. Still, obviously, one can't be sensible all the time. Another equally ridiculous fancy of mine was to frame new laws, altering the penalties. What was wanted to my mind was the chance to give a criminal a chance, if only a dog's chance, one chance in 1,000. There might be some drug or combination of drugs which would kill the patient. I thought of him as the patient 999 times in 1,000. That he should know this was, of course, essential. For after taking much thought calmly, I came to the conclusion that what was wrong about the guillotine was that by condemned man had no chance at all, absolutely none. In fact, the patient's death had been ordained and irrevocably. It was a foregone conclusion. If by some fluke the knife didn't do its job, they started again. So it came to this, that, against the grain, no doubt, the condemned man had to hope his apparatus was in good working order. This, I thought, was a flaw in the system, and on the face of it, my view was sound enough. On the other hand, I had to admit the proved efficiency of the system. It came to this, the man under sentence was obliged to collaborate mentally. It was an interest that all should go off without a hitch. Another thing I had to recognize was that, until now, I had the wrong ideas on the subject. For some reason, I'd always supposed that one had to go up the steps and climb up to a scaffold to be guillotined. Probably that was because of the 1789 revolution. I mean, what I learned about it at school and the pictures I had seen. Then one morning I remembered a photograph the newspapers had featured on the occasion of the execution of a famous criminal. Actually, the apparatus stood on the ground. There was nothing impressive about it, and it was much narrower than I imagined. It struck me as rather odd that the picture had escaped my memory until now. What had struck me at the time was the very neat appearance of the guillotine. Its shining surfaces and finish reminded me of some laboratory instrument. One always exaggerated ideas about what one doesn't know. Now, I had to admit, it seemed a very simple process, getting guillotined. The machine is on the same level as the man, and he walks toward it as he steps forward to meet somebody he knows. In a sense, that too was disappointing. The business of climbing a scaffold, leaving the world below, so to speak, gave something from a man's imagination to get hold of. But as it was, the machine dominated everything. They killed you discreetly, with a hint of shame and much efficiency. There were two other things about which I was always thinking: the dawn and my appeal. However, I did my best to keep my mind off these thoughts. I lay down, looked up at the sky, and forced myself to study it. When the light began to turn green, I knew that night was coming. And another thing I did to affect the course of my thoughts was to listen to my heart. I couldn't imagine that this faint throbbing which had been with me for so long would ever cease. Imagination has never been one of my strong points. Still, I tried to picture a moment where the beating of my heart no longer echoed in my head, but in vain. The dawn and my mind, my appeal were still there. I ended up believing it was a silly little thing to force one's thoughts out of their natural groove. They always came for one at dawn, that much I knew. So really, all my nights were spent in waiting for that dawn. I never liked being taken by surprise. When something happens to me, I want to be ready for it. That's why I got into the habit of sleeping off and on in the daytime and watching through the night for the first hint of daybreak in the dark dome above. The worst period of the night was that vague hour when I knew they usually come. Once it was after midnight, I waited, listening intently. Never before had my ears perceived so many noises, such tiny sounds. Still, I must say I was lucky in one respect. Never during any of these periods did I hear her footsteps. Mother used to say, however miserable one is, there's always something to be thankful for. And each morning, when the sky brightened and light began to flood my cell, I agreed with her. Because I might have just as well have heard footsteps and felt my heart shattered into bits. Even though the faintest rustle had sent me hurrying to the other door and pressing an ear to the rough cold wood, and I listened so intently so I could hear my breathing, quick and hoarse like a dog's panting. Even so, there was an end. My heart hadn't split, and I knew I had another 24 hours respite. Then all day, there was my appeal to think about. I made the most of this idea, studying any effects so as to squeeze out the maximum of consolation. Thus, I always began assuming the worst. My appeals dismissed, that meant, of course, I was to die. Sooner than others, obviously. But, I reminded myself, it's common knowledge that life isn't worth living anyhow. And on a wide view, I could see that it makes a little difference whether one dies at age 30 or 70. In either case, other men and women will continue living, the world will go on before. Also, whenever I die now or 40 years hence, this business of dying had to be got through inevitably. Still, somehow, this line of thought wasn't as consoling as it should have been. The idea of those years of life in hand was a galling reminder. However, I could argue myself out of it by picturing what would have been my feelings when my term was up and my death cornered me. Once you're up against it, the precise manner of your death was obviously of small importance. Therefore, but it was hard not to lose thread of the argument leading up to that. Therefore, I should be prepared to face the dismissal of my appeal. At this stage, but only at this stage, I had to speak. The right! And accordingly, I gave myself leave to consider the other alternative, that my appeal was successful. And then the trouble was to calm down the sudden rush of joy racing through my body and even bring tears to my eyes. But it was up to me to bring the nerves to heal and steady my mind. For even concerning the possibility, I had to make up some order in my thoughts so as to keep my consolation. As regards the first alternative more plausible, when I had succeeded, I had earned a good hour's peace in my mind, and that, anyhow, was something. It was at one of those moments I refused once again to speak to the chaplain. I had just turned down my appeal and felt my blood circulating slow with steady throbs. No, I didn't want to see the chaplain. Then I did something I hadn't done for quite a while. I fell to thinking about Marie. She hadn't written for ages. Probably, I summarized, she had grown tired of being the mistress of a man sentenced to death. Or she might be ill or dead. After all, such things happen. How could I have known about it, since, apart from our two bodies separated now, there is no link between us, nothing to remind us of each other. Supposing she were dead, her memory would mean nothing. I couldn't feel an interest in a dead girl. This seemed to me quite normal, just as I realized people would soon forget me once I was dead. I couldn't even say that this was hard to stomach. Really, there was no idea to which one didn't get acclimatized in time. My thoughts had reached this point where the chaplain walked in, unannounced. I couldn't help giving a start on seeing him. He noticed this evidently, as he promptly told me to not be alarmed. I reminded him that usually visits were at another hour, and for a pretty grim occasion. This, he replied, was just a friendly visit. It had no concern with my appeal, about which he knew nothing. Then he sat down on my bed, asking me to sit beside him. I refused, not because I had anything against him. He seemed a mild, amiable man. He remained quite still at first, his arms resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on his hands. They were slender but sinewy hands, which made me think of two nimble little animals. Then he gently rubbed them together. He stayed so long in the same position for a while I almost forgot he was there. All of a sudden he jerked his head up and looked me in the eyes. "Why," he asked, "don't you let me come to see you?" I explained that I didn't believe in God. "Are you really sure of that?" I said I saw no point in troubling my head about the matter. Whether I believed or didn't was, to my mind, a question of so little importance. He then leaned back against the wall, laying his hands flat on his thighs. Almost without seeming to address me, he remarked that often he noticed one fancies one is quite sure something, when in point of fact one isn't. When I said nothing, he looked at me again and said, "Don't you agree?" I said that it seemed quite possible. But though I mightn't be so sure about what interested me, I was actually sure what didn't interest me, and the question he raised didn't interest me at all. He looked away and, without altering his posture, asked if it was because I felt utterly desperate that I spoke out like this. I explained that I wasn't despair I felt, but fear, which was natural enough. In that case, he said firmly, God can help you. All the men I've seen in your position turn to him in their time of trouble. Obviously, I replied they were at liberty to do so if they felt like it. I, however, didn't want to be helped, and I hadn't time to work up interest for something that didn't interest me. He fluttered his hands fretfully, and then standing up, smoothed out his cassock. When he was done, he began talking, addressing me as my friend. It wasn't because I had been condemned to death, he said, that he spoke to me in this way. In his opinion, every man on the earth was under the sentence of death. There, I interrupted him. That wasn't the same thing, I pointed out. And what's more, it could be no consolation. He nodded. Maybe. Still, if you don't die soon, you'll die one day. And the same question will arise. How will you face that terrible final hour? I replied that I'd face it exactly as I was facing it now. Thereat, he stood up and looked at me in the eyes. It was a trick I knew too well. I used to amuse myself trying it on Aunt Manuel and Celeste, and 9 times out of 10 they looked away uncomfortably. I could see the chaplain was an old hand at it, as his gaze never faltered, and his voice was quite steady when he said, Have you no hope at all? Do you really think that when you die outright, and nothing remains? I said, Yes. He dropped his eyes and sat down again. He was truly sorry for me, he said. It must make life unbearable for a man to think, as I did. The priest was beginning to bore me, and resting his shoulder on the wall, just beneath the little skylight, I looked away. Though I didn't trouble much to follow what he said, I gathered he was questioning me again. Presently his tone became agitated, urgent, and I realized that he was genuinely distressed. I began to pay more attention. He felt convinced my appeal would succeed, but I was saddled with a load of guilt of which I must get rid. In his view, man's justice was a vain thing. Only God's justice mattered. I pointed out that the former had condemned me. Yes, he agreed, but it hadn't absolved me from my sin. I told him that I wasn't conscious of any sin. All I knew was that I had been guilty of a criminal offense. Well, I was paying the penalty of that offense, and no one had the right to expect anything more of me. Just then he got up again, and it struck me that if he wanted to move in this tiny cell, almost the only choice between staying up and sitting down. I was staring at the floor. He took a single step towards me and halted, as if he didn't dare to come nearer. Then he looked up through the bars at the sky. You are mistaken, my son, he said gravely. There's more that might be required of you, and perhaps it will be required of you. What do you mean? You might be asked to see. To see what? Slowly the priest gazed around my cell, and I was struck by the sadness of his voice when he replied, These stone walls, I know it only too well, are steeped in human suffering. I've never been able to look at them without a shudder, and yet, believe me, I'm speaking from the depths of my heart. I know that even the wretchedest amongst you have sometimes seen, taking form against that grayness, a divine face. It's that face you were asked to see. This roused me a little. I informed him that I'd been staring at those walls for months. There was nothing in the world that I knew better than I knew them. And once upon a time, perhaps I used to try to see a face, but it was a sun-gold face, lit up with desire. Marie's face. I had no luck, I'd never seen it, and now I'd given up trying. Indeed, I'd never seen anything taking form, as he called it, against those grey walls. The chaplain gazed at me with sort of sadness. I now had my back to the wall, and light was flowing over my forehead, and he muttered some words I didn't catch, then abruptly asked if he might kiss me. I said, no. Then he turned, came up to the wall, and slowly drew his hand along it. Do you really love these earthly things so very much? He asked in a low voice. I made no reply. For quite a while he kept his eyes averted. His presence was getting more and more irksome. I was on the point of telling him to go and leave me in peace, when all of a sudden he swung around on me and burst out passionately, No, no! I refuse to believe it! I'm sure you've often wished there was an afterlife. Of course I had, I told him. Everybody has that wish at times, but that had no more importance than wishing to be rich, or to swim very fast, or to have a better shaped mouth. It was in the same order of things. I was going on in the same vein when he cut in with a question. How did I picture life after the grave? I fairly bawled out at him. A life in which I can remember this life on Earth. That's all I want out of it. And in the same breath, I told him I'd had enough of his company. But apparently he had more to say on the subject of God. I went close up to him and made a last attempt to explain that I had very little time left, and I wasn't going to waste it on God. Just a few pages left. Then he tried to change the subject by asking me why I had once addressed him as father, seeing that he was a priest. That irritated me still more, and I told him he wasn't my father. Quite the contrary, he was on the other side. No, no, my son, he said, laying his hand on my shoulder. I'm on your side, though you don't realize it, because your heart is hardened, but I shall pray for you. Then, I don't know how it was, but something seemed to break inside me, and I started yelling at the top of my voice. I hurled insults at him. I told him not to waste his run and prayers on me. It was better to burn than to disappear. I'd taken him by the neckband of his cassock, and in a sort of ecstasy of joy and rage, I poured it out on him. All the thoughts that had been simmering in my brain. He seemed so cocksure, you see, and yet none of his certainties were worth one strand of a woman's hair. Living as he did, like a corpse, he couldn't even be sure of being alive. It might look as if my hands were empty. Actually, I was sure of myself, sure about everything, far surer than he was. Sure of my present life and of the death that was coming. That, no doubt, was all I had. But at least that certainty was something I could get my teeth into, just as it had gotten its teeth into me. I'd been right. I was still right. I was always right. I'd passed my life in a certain way, and I might have passed it in a different way if I felt like it. I'd have an act thus, and I'd an act otherwise. I hadn't done X, whereas I'd done X, Y, or Z. And what did that mean? That all the time, I'd been waiting for this present moment, from that dawn, tomorrow, or another days, which was to justify me. Nothing had the least importance, and I knew that quite well. Why? He knew too, why. From the dark horizon of my future, a sort of slow, persistent breeze had been blowing towards me. All my life long, from the years that were to come, and on its way, the breeze had leveled out all the ideas that people tried to foist on me, and the equally unreal years I was then living through. What difference could they make to me, the depths of others or a mother's love or his God, or the way a man decides to live life, the fate he thinks he chooses, since one and the same fate was bound to choose not only to me, but thousands of millions of privileged people who, like him, called themselves my brothers. Surely he must see that. Every man alive was privileged. There was only one class of men, the privileged class. All alike would be condemned to die one day. His turn, too, would come like the others, and what difference would it make if, after being charged with murder, he were executed because he didn't weep at his mother's funeral, since it all came to the same thing in the end. The same thing for Salamano's wife and Salamano's dog. That little robot woman was as guilty as the girl from Paris who married Meursault, or as Marie, who wanted me to marry her. What did it matter Raymond was as much my Pallas Celeste, who was a far worthier man? What did it matter if, at the very moment Marie was kissing a new boyfriend? As a condemned man himself, couldn't he grasp what I meant by the dark wind blowing for my future? I had been shouting so much that I lost my breath, and just then the jailers rushed in and tried to release the chaplain from my grip. One of them made as if to strike me. The chaplain quieted them down and they gazed at me for a moment without speaking. I could see the tears in his eyes. Then he turned and left the cell. Once he'd gone, I felt calm again, but all this excitement had exhausted me and I dropped heavily onto my sleeping bag. I must have had a longish sleep, for when I woke, the stars were shining down on my face. Sounds of the countryside came faintly in, and the cool night air, veined with smells of earth and salt, fanned my cheeks. The marvelous peace of the sleep-bound summer night flooded me through like a tide. Then, just on the edge of daybreak, I heard a steamer's siren. People were starting on a voyage to a world which had ceased to concern me forever. Almost for the first time in many months, I thought of my mother, and now it seemed to me I understood why at her life's end she'd taken on a fiancé, why she planned on making a fresh start. There too, in that home, where lives were flicking her out, the dusk came as a mournful solace. With her death so near, Mother must have felt like someone on the brink of freedom, ready to start life all over again. No one in the world had any right to weep for her, and I too felt ready to start life all over again. As a great rush of anger had washed me clean, emptied me of hope, and gazing up at the dark sky spangled with its signs and stars, for the first time, I laid my heart open to the benign indifference to the universe. To feel like so myself, indeed so brotherly, made me realize that I'd been happy, and I was happy still. For all to be accomplished, for me to feel less lonely, all that remained was to hope on the day of my execution there should be a huge crowd of spectators, and that they should greet me with the howls of execration. Fuck. 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 Oh, fuck. Fuck. Oh. Fuck. Oh. Fuck. Oh, that was... Oh my god, that fucking ending. Really, I couldn't follow much in the end. He was explaining the world in his fit of rage by the way the priest was trying to push on his view of God and how all men could be forgiven. God. Fuck. There will be a video. There will be a video where I cover... I reference this stream and I cover my thoughts on The Stranger as a Limbus Company fan and who's known very little about Meursault until now. I think, in fact, we read from part 1, chapter 6, which was... Where even was that? Today, we started from page 59 all the way to page 54. So just a bit under 100 pages in just a few hours. I get it. I get it. I get why this book is so well loved. I fucking get it. The way they have to recontextualize this, it has to be so delicate and so specific to truly do this book justice. How they could possibly give him a happy ending, I don't know. I've decided if I speak any more of this book, I'm going to probably spoil what I'm going to say in the planned video. And also going to, just talk over myself a lot. It was good. This book was very fucking good. It's good. It's so good. Thank you for watching me read through The Stranger. I have stumbled over a lot of the words because of my lisp, but I think I think I create enough of an enjoyable experience when it comes to getting through the book, and I hope you enjoy. I might do a reread of Metamorphosis soon. I I've been thinking of doing that because Metamorphosis is short. We can get that done in one stream. But anyways, thank you for watching. Have a good day. Be good people.